Hey friends, it's Sam from DIY Huntress, and today we are taking it super easy on the channel. So I recently opened up about this on my Instagram page, but over the past few weeks I've been struggling with some medical issues and I've officially been diagnosed with a degenerative disc disorder in my jaw. Say that 3 times fast. But I'm fine, I'll be okay, I'm riding the wave, I'm taking things one day at a time. But because of my recent diagnosis, I have had to require some pretty frequent medical attention recently, which has caused me to have to take things super slow. Because I'm really bad at taking days off, and because making things is totally my therapy, I decided to share just like a super simple project with you guys today that I made in my workshop in one weekend. In fact, I'm not only sharing just one project with you guys in this video, I am sharing 3 different ways to make some DIY boho artwork for your home using limited tools. Okay, and side note, but also related. I am so stoked because I'm finally starting that shed shop makeover that I've been talking about for weeks. So for the next few weeks, you guys will be getting tons of different content, kind of giving a sneak peek at these little makeovers in the space until I share the full reveal when I am finished. So if you're not already, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell because there's going to be tons of fun content coming out that I cannot wait to share. Okay, there was a reason I was sharing that and I don't remember why. Oh, right, okay, so because I'm finally starting that workshop makeover, I was able to dive on into that infamous scrap pile that I have in my workshop. I know you know what I'm talking about. And dig up some scrap wood for this project today. So overall, I was able to make all 3 of these pieces happen in one weekend using scrap wood and about $20 in materials from the craft store. And although this is a different project than something I usually share on my channel, I'm pretty excited to just show you what I was able to make in some downtime using some simple materials. So with all that being said, let's get started. I feel like the scrap pile just never gets any smaller. Okay friends, so like I mentioned in my introduction, I really wasn't feeling so hot last weekend, so I decided to take it gentle in my workshop and just create a couple of boho art pieces for my apartment. Now, these boho art pieces are amazing projects for beginner woodworkers, and luckily I was able to partner up with my incredible friends at DAP Products to share some of their products that also help make these projects come to life. Okay, but enough business, let's jump on into this tutorial. So the first piece that I decided to make was actually a knockoff version of a $300 piece of artwork that I saw online, and I really did not want to spend $300 on a piece of artwork with some string and wood, so I decided to make my own for honestly about like $7. Actually, in hindsight, I don't even think I spent $7 on this because I think I ended up using a coupon when I purchased the string for this project. But anyway, I started by tracing a large half circle onto my piece of plywood using some old tabletops that I had from a project I've already done on my channel. And then I cut that half circle out using my jigsaw and sanded down all of the edges to make them nice and smooth. At this point, I actually decided I didn't love the exposed edges, so I also decided to add some iron-on edge banding, which is super simple process. You just iron it on, press it in, and trim off the excess. I also like to take some time here to just sand down all the edges to blend everything in to make the piece look like a solid piece of wood. And I obviously just continued this entire process for the whole art piece. I'm pretty positive I've used an iron on wood and edge banding projects more times than I've ever used an iron on actual clothing. But seriously, Mom, if you're watching, hi, I'm sorry for stealing your iron, but I love it and you're not getting it back. Okay, so after adding all of the edge banding, it was time to start working on the area in which I was going to add all of the string. And I actually decided that I wanted to route out a groove in the back of the art piece so that when I hang the art piece on the wall, the string isn't bumped up against the wall, but rather it's installed in this groove so the entire piece can lay flat against the wall. This is totally optional if you are not comfortable using a router. Which, side note, shameless plug, I host a tool school on the first Tuesday of every month on Instagram, and last month I did tackle the router, so if you want to learn more about it, please go check out my Instagram page, and it's listed in the highlights. Okay, but back to the build. So once I was done routing out that channel, I then stained the entire piece, and as always, you can find a full list of the materials and tools that I use for this project on my website by clicking on the link below this video. I then let the stain dry, and at this point it was time to cut all of the string to add to the back of this art piece. So I decided that I wanted to avoid using fasteners to attach the string to the back of the art piece, and I have used some DAP Rapid Fuse in some of my other projects before and actually really like it for smaller applications. And recently I did get my hands on the spray adhesive version of Rapid Fuse and decided that I wanted to try to use it for this project. So I taped off any of the areas that I did not want to get sticky from the Rapid Fuse, sprayed the Rapid Fuse in small sections, allowed it to get tacky, and then began to add some of that string. Now this stuff was pretty sticky, so I did end up putting on gloves at some point, and honestly, if I were to do this again, I actually would not tape the wood at all because it ended up drying super clear, and it was such a hassle to get the tape off because it was so sticky. So I would just skip the tape altogether, spray this baby on liberally, and just go. Oh, and one little trick that I did do at the end of all of this was that I just sprayed a little bit of Rapid Fuse on top of the string after adding it and pressed everything down into place using a straight edge. And this just helped the string dry super flat and super firm, and it worked out really well. And here's where you could see me kind of struggling to remove that tape. So yeah, I probably would have skipped it. To be quite honest, if I do this again, I'm definitely going to skip the tape. But I basically just went back, replaced anything that fell off, trimmed any of those rogue pieces of rope, and then I was pretty much good to go on to the next step. As much as I wanted to kind of leave these strings long, I was getting more like jellyfish vibes than I was boho art vibes. So I used that original tabletop to kind of just get a feel for how short I wanted to trim these pieces of rope and then trim them in a circular kind of shape before I was pretty much happy with how it looked. At this point, all that was left to do was to hang a hook on the back of this art piece so that I could hang it in my apartment. And honestly, after like maybe a few hours of work, if that, I had a really cute boho art piece to add to my apartment that did not cost me $300. And like I mentioned a little earlier in this particular project, something that I love about this is that it did require minimal tools. You really could just get away with using a jigsaw for this project if you wanted to, which really makes this a great project for beginner woodworkers. I promised 3 weekend projects in one video, so let's move on to number 2. I started this project by using an embroidery hoop that I purchased at the craft store. Okay, mind you, I've never purchased an embroidery hoop before, and I think it's hysterical that the only time I ever have is to do a woodworking project with it. So yeah, to get started, I took this embroidery hoop and decided I was going to cut it into 2 separate pieces. And to do this, I used a Dremel rotary tool and a metal cutting wheel, and honestly, it was pretty easy to cut through this thing. So this project in particular is kind of like false advertisement because since I was able to cut this embroidery hoop into 2 pieces, I did make 2 different art pieces from this one embroidery hoop. So if we're getting technical here, I really actually made 4 art pieces in one weekend, and I'm not really mad about it. But anyway, at this point I then brought some scrap wood dowels over to my miter saw and cut them so that they would perfectly fit within those half circles that I cut out of the embroidery hoop. And then I used some DAP Tank Bond clear epoxy in order to attach the wood to the metal. This stuff is actually super easy to use. It's a 2-part epoxy that you squeeze out of a tube and then you mix it all up, and then you have about 5 minutes to work with it before it starts to harden. One thing I did forget to mention is that when trying to adhere wood to metal, it's really important that both pieces are thoroughly sanded. So I actually sanded both pieces using 80 grit sandpaper, applied my epoxy, and then clamped everything together nice and tightly and let it sit for a couple of hours. I actually did repeat this process on the other embroidery hoop as well, but I'm just showing one because you guys get the picture. And honestly, while those were drying, I did work on some of the other projects that I'm showing in this video, and multitasking was the only way I was really able to get all 3 of these done in one weekend. But after letting those cure, I then removed them from the clamps, and it was time to start cutting some pieces of roping or yarn, that's the word I was looking for, some yarn to add to this piece. I didn't really worry about what length these were because I'm going to be trimming them later, but at this point I really just put on some music and zoned out and then just added all of my pieces, and this probably took the longest out of any of the projects, but it was totally worth it in the end. I ended up opting for a black yarn for this piece, and then for the identical brother piece I used a white tinted yarn. And in true Sam fashion, at some point my camera died in this process, so here is the final piece of yarn being added to all of those other millions of pieces of yarn that I put on this project. And like I mentioned, because I was not paying attention to how long these pieces were when I was cutting them, I did just use a straight edge to cut all of the pieces to a similar size once I was done adding all of those little pieces of string. And while I was able to complete all of this in the workshop for this particular piece that you see me cutting here, for the other piece, which has the whitish tinted yarn, I actually ended up doing that in bed later in the day while binge watching Netflix shamelessly. But once both of them were done, it was just time to hang them up in my apartment, and I'll be totally honest with you guys, these were my favorite art pieces of the bunch. If I'm not mistaken, like with all of my craft store coupons, I think I maybe spent like, I don't know, $11 to make both of these pieces of artwork. Totally worth it. And again, it also doesn't hurt that I was able to make these within the same weekend as all of the other art pieces. Now last but certainly not least came another fun scrapwood project that I decided to make using some leftover 1/4-inch plywood and a smaller embroidery hoop. Now this project didn't quite turn out the way that I wanted it to. In my head, it was inspired by a piece that I saw on World Market, but I decided to tackle it in my own way. And I did start by tracing the circle onto my piece of plywood and then bringing that plywood over to my miter saw to cut down into a triangle shape that would fit inside of the circle. I don't really have measurements for this. I kind of just like guesstimated a lot of it, which is not the way to go. So I definitely did have to go back and do a ton of trimming in order to get this to fit inside of the embroidery hoop. Now, as you can see, I used some painter's tape to prevent some of the chipping, but once I was happy with the general size and shape of the triangle, I then hand sanded it super smooth, fit it inside of that embroidery hoop one last time to make sure that it fit, and then I decided to cover up those raw edges of the plywood using some DAP wood filler. So I'm obviously showing you how to make all of these projects in like a cohesive way, but I really did bounce back and forth between each one of them. So while I waited for this wood filler to dry, I then worked on another part of a different project and then came back to this one once that wood filler had completely dried. I then sanded everything flat one last time and then began to drill holes in each corner of the triangle, and this plywood was like so crappy. I kept ripping out pieces of the plywood when I would drill my holes, so I used some wood putty to then just cover up all of that ugliness, and it worked beautifully. I then moved on to staining this triangle piece in a wood stain. Again, that color is linked on my website and you can find that link below this video. And once that dried, it was then time to add this piece to that embroidery hoop using some small metal clasps. I don't know how, but I found these metal clasps in the jewelry section for I think $1, and they were super easy to use. I was able to put them into place just using my fingers. Definitely using needle nose pliers would have probably been smarter, but I just used my fingers to add a couple of clasps to each opening as well as the embroidery hoop. Okay, so I know people usually save their best for last, but honestly, I did not with this project. I actually did not like the way this thing turned out on its own. It was just way too plain, so I decided to use it as a layering art piece for the string art that I made earlier in this video. On the reel, it definitely made me feel so much better about my decision to make this piece because the layering looked kind of perfect. I probably could have pretended that I planned it this way, but you guys, I didn't. This was just like one of those happy accident moments, and I'm not mad about it. So I know that these projects are a little different than what I usually share on my channel, but I hope that by sharing these, you can see that you don't really need to do giant projects in order to make a fun impact in your home and in your space. I also wanted to share a fun beginner project just in case there are any friends here who are looking to get more comfortable with power tools. And honestly, making things is my therapy, so finding time on the weekends to kind of just like be in my workshop and make things is so important to me. And even though I haven't been feeling so well lately, I'm so happy that I got a chance to kind of make something small and fun in one weekend that still made an impact in my apartment. I really hope you guys liked this small, gentle weekend warrior project. If you did, please let me know in the comments if you would like to see some more projects like this one. Also, make sure to please subscribe to my YouTube channel and click that notification bell because I do have a ton of really fun projects coming up this year that I cannot wait to share with you all. But until next time, friends, thanks for being awesome and happy DIYing.